So where we're going to start today is Jesus, what happened? Looking at this entire month, which that's kind of the way a pastor steps into the scripture, is looking at the big picture. We actually started at the beginning of February, Jesus being that 12-year-old who got left behind in Jerusalem. And when mom and dad found Jesus, who'd been left behind in Jerusalem, Jesus was in the temple. He was teaching, he was having conversation with the scribes and the Pharisees, with the priests. An interesting thing, all those who heard Jesus were astounded at his intellect and his replies. He was outstanding. He was incredible, what he had to say and how he had to say it, and he seemed to have everybody's attention. And at this point in time, he's got everybody's attention in a good way, shall we say. So just a little bit further, Luke 4, Jesus has arrived in his hometown. He's handed the scroll. He opens the scroll up to Isaiah, finds this particular passage, and reads it. God has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted, liberty to the captives, sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free. And of course, Jesus doesn't leave it there. Jesus presses on, and before Jesus is done, they are trying to push him off the cliff. Jesus, what happened? Last week, we started into Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. Remember, Jesus isn't in a high place looking down. Jesus is in the midst of the people on the plain, leveling it out. A new vision of who's included. And last week, Jesus says to us, blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, blessed are those who weep, blessed are those who are hated. And if we're honest with ourselves, we have to wonder what it means and what we're supposed to do with all that. But folks, it only gets harder. Thank you very much, Jesus. Because we get the woes too. Woe to the rich. Woe to the full. Woe to those who laugh. Woe to those who are spoken well of. It should have reached home by now. And if it hasn't, the Sermon on the Plain continues. Today, the word to us is, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, and still, or again, Jesus says, love your enemies. If it comes up twice, I'm guessing that was kind of an important point that he wanted to make there. I hope we can sit with and maybe squirm with how tough of a call and message this is. As this came up this week, as I had to sit with this week, I went right back to that place. You know, the kids are talking about teachers. And I've told you the story about a teacher that was unkind to a daughter of mine. Not only unkind, but probably really close to abusive. And still, I am in the place that I hold that up. And I step into that over and over again. These words are for your pastor. I'm guessing they are for all of us. So as we think about this, as we think about where we're called, what we're called to be, I was thinking about the alternative, because I think the alternative is where we're probably more comfortable being. Maybe not all the way to the Bourne identity, the Bourne supremacy, and the Bourne ultimatum, which is all about hunt them down, get even the score, find out what's going on. Much more comfortable, at least in theory, than loving our neighbors. Took it to another level as well. Daughter goes missing, and he will revenge on everybody that stands between he and his daughter. Culturally, I think those are more comfortable places for us to be than to love our enemy. It's an old story. It's a story from World War II, Corrie ten Boom. She was from the Netherlands. She and her family were watchmakers. And early on during World War II, they became a hiding place, either for people that were part of the resistance movement or for Jews who were trying to flee to safety. Of course, they were turned in. They were betrayed. They were taken away. Interestingly enough, the Jews that were hiding in their house at the time were not found. But her family was. And her family went off to a camp. And I think the entirety of her family, minus her, died in camps. When she was released from the camps, she went back to the Netherlands. She opened a center, a place that people coming out of the camps could come to learn some skills, to get back on their feet before they went back into life. Interestingly enough, this place also became a place where Nazi collaborators were welcomed. Corrie ten Boom would travel to Germany eventually and come face to face with two of her captors. Two people that tormented both her and her sister, and she would forgive them. The call that we have as followers of Jesus are that kind of radical forgiveness. But as we think about our call, as we think about what it means and how we step into it, it seems to me like there's some things that we need to think about that forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not denial. Forgiveness is not to say that something didn't happen. Forgiveness doesn't mean that there will not be consequences for our behaviors. The police officer may forgive me and still write me that ticket. Forgiveness is not enabling. When someone is using and abusing, it is not forgiveness to allow that behavior to go on and on. Forgiveness is not pretending an offense doesn't count or it doesn't matter. Oh, it really didn't hurt that badly. That's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is not allowing ourselves to be abused. Forgiveness is not being a doormat for someone else, for someone who is manipulative or hurtful. Forgiveness is not assuming that God isn't interested in justice, because God is interested in justice, and that will happen in God's way at God's time. Today, we hold this whole forgiveness business right along with Joseph's story. Joseph, whose brothers sell him into slavery. First, they're going to kill him. Instead of killing him, they sell him to slavery. And somehow God has a way to step into that and bring good out of what was intended for evil. God is absolutely interested in justice. And forgiveness is not instantaneous, at least not if we're honest with ourselves. It's a choice we make. It's a life that we have to step into over and over and over again. Forgiveness is not. What about what forgiveness is? It is a way to unburden ourselves from the past. Forgiveness really is about freedom. If I would let go of that teacher that I think wronged my child, I wouldn't have to keep replaying the story. I would be free from that burden. Forgiveness is not choosing to be resentful, thus replaying the offense. Forgiveness is releasing myself from the tyranny of bitterness. And quite honestly, forgiveness transforms our way of seeing. In the Joseph story, again, that is so incredibly clear. Joseph's talking about God had something good planned in this. Joseph was able to see what he was able to do because he was in Egypt. how many lives he was able to save, including his own family. And here's the kicker, folks. Forgiveness is not fair. It's a gift. And if we're going to be really honest and forward, it's a gift that first came to us on the cross. And because we have been given that gift, we are called and equipped to be that gift. So, a quote and an illustration to think about this. Jesus saying to us, "Do unto others as I have done unto you." Jesus being the model for that. N.T. Wright is a professor, teaches New Testament. He is a theologian. He's a retired Anglican bishop. He put it this way: you become like what you worship, or you reflect what you worship. Who do we see in the person of Jesus? And who we see, how we see Jesus, will temper who we become as his followers. Just recently heard the story of a young person brought up in the kind of a church that has checks. This is what it means to be a good Christian. If I'm a good Christian, I'm doing these things. It was a church that he couldn't be in. Left as a young person. Life went on. Mental illness came into his world. Post-mental illness, the marriage fell apart. And in the midst of all of that brokenness, he went looking for God. He went looking for a place that was safe and welcoming and graceful and hopeful and merciful. He went back to that same church, and he found the same theology. A theology that was only even harder on him because of the mental illness and the broken relationship. Clearly, there were all kinds of boxes that he could not mark. And instead of finding a safe place to land, he found judgment. He found that he was not welcome, that there was no place for him in that land of checks. You become like what you worship. You reflect what you worship. The reality is, God, Jesus doesn't just want to be our hero. He wants to be our God. A God that we not only follow, but that we reflect with our minds and our hearts and our hands and our feet. We who have been forgiven are called to reflect that forgiveness. Notice the order. We who have known grace are called to share that grace. We who have been given hope are called to reflect and be that hope. So the language is to love our enemies, to love each other. We love because we have been loved. Thanks be to God.
Well, this light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, I let my little light shine. Oh, Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it shine. Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it shine every day, every day.